To tell you a story, because this YouTube channel is about stories, animal stories, about a horse named Leroy. And a longer version is on my website written by his human. It's kind of a bloggy, journal-y thing. It's about 20 years old. But this is the short version. It's about a very sad, depressed horse. And the reason I'm telling this, I have lots of stories about depressed animals that Reiki and communication have helped. And this one is just one that touches my heart a lot. So I'm sharing it because a few days ago, I saw either on Twitter or Mastodon. I've moved over to Mastodon, which is pretty cool if you haven't found it yet, as Twitter is imploding. Somebody posted a picture of a kitty that they had found, and it was terrified, and it was squished between, I don't know what it was, two pieces of wood, a part of a staircase, something, and they couldn't get it out, and it wouldn't eat. They tried like 10 different foods, and they're fussing around, and they're like, what should we do? And I said, you might get an animal communicator to speak to him. And of course I was ignored. That's fine. And I wasn't trying to sell myself. I didn't say I'm a communicator. But it got me thinking how silly humans are. It's like, I mean, I think about that a lot in terms of how they treat animals. Our animals grieve and they get traumatized, same as we do. And if you were terrified, had been brought into a stranger's home and didn't know what was going to happen next, you obviously been mistreated, something had happened, you're on the street, right? Would you want to eat? Maybe if you were like starving, but and would you just cuddle up to these people? Maybe some animals would, but not necessarily. So anyway, here's a story about Leroy. Leroy he passed a Belgian draft. So if you're not a horse person, drafts are those ginormous horses with great big feet. And a Belgian has those feathers along on the back of their legs, along here, and they're kind of beige colored, yellowish colored. They're called palomino colored. And he was an Amish workhorse. And unfortunately, I'm sure not all, but the culture, the Amish culture seems to believe, I'm trying to be delicate here, that animals are put on this earth for humans to use. And so they use these horses and they use them up. They don't use tractors. They don't use, right? The Amish don't use mechanized stuff. So, and then they just take them to auction where they're usually sold for slaughter. Although we can't slaughter in the United States anymore, but at this point, but we send them to Canada or to Mexico. At this point, we could slaughter in the States as well. So he was brought to an auction, which is also a terrifying place for horses to be put all smashed together. And then there's an auction or people are bidding loudly, and then they most often go to slaughter. And a friend of mine went to the auction because she rescued horses, not really a friend, a client of mine, from time to time would rescue a horse, and she went and she saw him and she fell in love with him and she brought him home. And he was so shut down emotionally, he wouldn't eat. She had a small herd, 3 or 4 other horses. He wouldn't approach the other horses. He wouldn't move. He like stood in one place, and she was really concerned. And she knew natural horsemanship. She contacted me. We'd met each other on a horse list. This is way before Facebook, when there were Yahoo groups. And there was which were kind of cool, actually. It was an email thing. And there was a group called Natural Horse, and that's how we met. And she said, I know that I could eventually get through to him, but he's like, 25 years old and isn't eating and is very thin, and I need some help. And so I worked them. And I did 3 sessions a week apart. And after the first one, oh my God, I started crying, and I tried to have really good boundaries. Of course, this is also probably 15 years ago, and my boundaries weren't as good as they are now. But you don't want to get pulled into an animal's grief. But I did for a minute. I could just feel it really strongly. It was like he was so, so sad that I could feel it. My eyes teared, and then you breathe. Okay, how can I help this creature? And he didn't talk about his past, but I assured him that he was safe, that he was in his forever home. He was never going to have to work again, ever, ever. That there would be kids there to groom him and kiss him and play with him, and they weren't even going to sit on him. He didn't have to do anything but eat and hang out with the other horses forever. He was there for good. Nobody was ever going to ask him to do anything he didn't want to do. And I shared my Reiki hands with him. And the client was sitting, she said she was sitting on a stone, a big rock next to him watching the session. This is from a distance. She was in Connecticut and I was in Chicago. But we, had an appointment. She knew what time it was happening. And she said she watched his body soften. And after the session, she said she was able to lay his hand gently on her hand gently on his shoulder. That's all. But she hadn't been able to touch him before without him getting really upset. So now this is years ago, so I don't remember exactly, but I did 3 sessions a week apart. And by the second session, he was eating, maybe even after the first one. He must have been. I wouldn't have waited a week. He was eating, and by the third session, he was in with the herd, not running around. He was older, creaky and skinny, but he was eating his food and he was eating lots of hay. So shouldn't have to worry because winter was coming. And so he started to put on weight and he was hanging out with the other horses and her kids could come and touch him. And it was awesome. So the point is not how great I am or how great Reiki is, but that please recognize that they grieve and they can be depressed. He was severely depressed. He was just in anguish. And that it can be relieved. There's a way to help them that doesn't involve just food. That doesn't always work. They're all different. Like when my little dog came to me, he asked to come to me from a shelter that I was volunteering in. And then he was terrified when he was here. I'm like, what the heck? And I do this work for a living. And I was like, you asked to come here and then you're afraid? I learned a lot from this guy. I'm still learning. It was grief. He was traumatized. So anyway, just know that we need to be aware of that and that they suffer. They don't always just come bounding into your life happy that you've saved them. They have trauma and depression and fear. And there's things that we can do. You can hire a professional. Your love isn't always enough. You can hire a professional to speak with them, share Reiki hands or other kinds of healing. There's all kinds of things, that you can do. So I just wanted to share that story about Leroy. And then he lived, I can't remember now, 6 months, 9 months. And one day she went out and she fed them. They lived outside. They had shelters. And she went out one morning and she fed them. She threw the hay. And then she went back a couple hours later to give them their grain. And he had died. I still makes me cry. It was 15 years ago. He had just laid down and died. He might have had a heart attack, or maybe he laid down and died. And she gave him, sorry, I'm going to cry. He was very special. The way that he responded so quickly, I could feel it when I was touching him with my Reiki hands, that he was softening and letting out the pain. He was very, very special. There's certain animal. I'm sorry, I'm just going to cry. There's certain animals that just, take up a space in your heart, and he was one of them. So, and he died peacefully and he died happy and, not in a slaughterhouse. So anyway, the moral of the story is don't assume that all animals are just going to be like delighted to see you. And, maybe they need a little extra assistance from a professional, and because they do grieve and they do get depressed and, and they do experience trauma, and we can help them. So that's it. I'm Pam Sorellis of Winged Horse Healing, Reiki for humans as well, and animals, animal communication. And, come check out my website. I've got a lot of, his story is there somewhere under testimonials. And I need to upgrade my site. I have really old stories there, and I have so many new ones I need to start sharing. Testimonials. on the site. But go, check it out. There's lots of stories and lots of articles. And you can sign up for my newsletter there too if you choose to. It's called Bits and Pieces, and I tell stories every week. And this one actually is in my Bits and Pieces this week, but usually they're different. The video and the written one are different. So again, that's Winged, WINGED, wingedhorsehealing.com. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye.